Sit back and throw one back with your pinky in the air and a middle finger to the world, and join me, the eclectic gentleman Stephen Watts, as we look back on this day in pro wrestling history. But before we do, put that drink down, like, share, and subscribe, and without further ado, let's get our wrestling history on. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, it is October 23rd, and we're going to start off as we always do on a positive note. That's right, these are your pro wrestling birthdays. 1965, the luchadora known as La Fugitive. 1987, WWF's Carmella. Of course, on the flip side of that coin, your pro wrestling deaths for October 23rd. 2000, Yokozuna. Alright, enough of the sad stuff. It's time to get to the meat and potatoes. That's right, these are your pro wrestling history highlights for October 23rd. Jumping in the Wayback Machine and going all the way to 1940, where we see Yvonne Robert defeat Lou Thesz for the Montreal World Heavyweight title, beginning his fifth reign. Fast forwarding 5 years to 1945, the St. Louis Post-Dispatch publishes an article noting that former sports writer Sam Mushnick will be acquiring a promoter's license for professional boxing and wrestling. Mushnick would go on to become one of the most successful promoters of all time, and at one point was the nucleus of the National Wrestling Alliance. Moving all the way to the 50s, 1956, Ben and Mike Sharp defeat Bill and Ed Miller to win the San Francisco version of the NWA World Tag Team titles for a 12th time. Grooving into the 60s, 1963, Mickey Sharp defeats Salento Rodriguez for the NWA Gulf Coast Heavyweight title in Mobile, Alabama. 2 years later in 1965, Kurt and Skull von Stroheimer defeat Sam Steamboat and Ron Etchison for the Florida version of the NWA World Tag Team titles in Tampa, Florida. 2 years later to 1967, the Sheik defeats Gino Brinto to win the vacant Montreal International Heavyweight title. And our final stop in the 60s, staying in 1967, Abdul the Butcher and Dr. Jerry Graham defeat Chris and John Tolos for the vacant version of the NWA Canadian Tag Team titles. Disco ducking it to our only stop in the 70s, 1974. Robert Fuller defeats Jerry Lawler to win the NWA Southern Heavyweight title in Nashville, Tennessee. Grabbing my boombox and going to the 80s, 1980. Bob Brown defeats Mike George to win the NWA Central States Heavyweight title in Kansas City, Kansas. This started Brown's 12th reign and ended George's 4th. That next year in 1981, Ken Patera defeats Jack Briscoe for the Missouri State Heavyweight title in St. Louis, Missouri, ending Briscoe's second title reign and beginning the second run for Patera. Moving to 1985, John Cortez defeats Johnny Saint to win the British World Lightweight title. 3 years later in 1988, Jerry Lawler defeats Kerry Von Erich in Memphis, Tennessee for the WCWA Heavyweight title. And our final stop in the 80s, 1989. Soul Taker defeats Jerry Lawler for the USWA Unified Heavyweight title in Memphis, Tennessee, ending Lawler's second reign with that belt. Grabbing my flannel and going to the decade of grunge, 1992. Black Bart and Johnny Mantell defeat the Ebony Experience, aka Harlem Heat, to win the GWF Tag Team titles in Dallas, Texas. 2 years later in 1994, WCW held their Halloween Havoc pay-per-view at the Joe Louis Arena in Detroit, Michigan. The main event sees WCW World Heavyweight Champion Hulk Hogan defeat Ric Flair in a steel cage match with a leg drop. Mr. T was the special guest referee. As a result of a pre-match stipulation, Flair had to retire. After the match, a masked man who had been brawling with Sting during the match attacked Hogan and was helped by Kevin Sullivan and John Tenta. The masked man was revealed to be Brutus Beefcake. And last but not least, 1995. Brian Christopher defeats Jesse James Armstrong for the USWA Southern Heavyweight title, beginning his 19th run with the belt. Those were your short but sweet Pro Wrestling History Highlights for October 23rd. I'm the Eclectic Gentleman, Stephen Watts, and we'll see you tomorrow.